When I was about 10 years old, I spent a weekend at my cousin's farmhouse, way out past the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of place where neighbors were nearby or cars passed often, just open land, long stretches of crops, and a house that felt too quiet when the wind died down. That weekend, my aunt and uncle left for church and didn't take us with them, so it was just us kids alone in the house, some older, some younger. I didn't think much of it at first. It actually felt kind of fun. Until the storm rolled in. The wind picked up fast. Not just a breeze. This was the kind of wind that howled, that pressed against the windows and made the walls creak. You could hear it moving through the crops outside like waves. I remember going to the window and looking out. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just rows and rows of whatever they were growing, bending and swaying in the wind. Then, I saw it. Something moving through the crops. Not the plants, through them. I could only see the top of it, just a head. Bright green. Way too solid to be part of the field. Way too smooth to be anything natural. It didn't bob like a person walking. It glided, steady, cutting through the rows like it knew exactly where it was going. I didn't stick around to watch. I ran to find the older kids. I told them what I saw, probably talking too fast, pointing back toward the window. They didn't laugh. They didn't brush it off either. They just kind of looked at each other, and one of them said we should all stay inside. Then a couple of them went out to check. That's when things changed. It couldn't have been more than a minute before one of them came sprinting back to the house, not walking fast, not joking, sprinting. They slammed the door behind them and yelled at all of us, "Go hide." No explanation, no details, just panic. That was enough for me. I ran. The house was unfamiliar and suddenly it felt huge. Hallways I didn't remember, corners that seemed darker than they should have been. I ducked into the first place I could find. And that's when I saw it again. From where I was hiding, I could see down part of a hallway leading from the back door. Something moved across it, slow, deliberate. I didn't see its face that time, just the back of it as it passed. The shape was wrong, too thin in some places, too long in others, and that same unnatural green, dull but unmistakable. It wasn't one of my cousins. It wasn't anything I recognized. I didn't wait to see more. I ran again, deeper into the house until I found another cousin. We squeezed ourselves behind a door, pressing into the narrow space between it and the wall, barely breathing. The outside storm roared louder. The house groaned around us, and then it came closer. I don't know how long we stayed there. It felt like forever, but it couldn't have been more than a couple minutes. All I remember is this shape, this thing entering the space in front of us. Tall, humanoid, that green head clearer now, but still not right, not shaped the way a head should be. It didn't move like a person. It didn't hesitate like a person would. It just approached, slowly, directly, like it knew exactly where it was going. I remember it leaning in, closing the distance, bearing down over us in that tight space. And then, nothing. No sound, no movement, just gone. I don't remember it leaving. I don't remember anyone screaming or fighting or even reacting. What I do remember is what came next. I started crying. I was 10, terrified, shaking, trying to explain what we had just seen. What was that? I kept asking. Where did it go? And my cousins just looked at me, confused, blank. Where did what go? At first, I thought they were joking, that it was some kind of prank and I just wasn't in on it yet. But they didn't laugh. They didn't smirk. They didn't break. They acted like nothing had happened, like there had been no storm panic, no running, no hiding, no thing in the house. The older ones didn't admit to anything. The younger ones didn't seem scared. It was like the entire event had been erased, except for me. I stayed there the rest of the night, still shaken, still trying to make sense of it. No one ever explained it. No one ever slipped up or hinted at a joke. And when my parents picked me up the next day, everything felt normal again. Too normal. Years later, I asked about it. Every single one of my cousins, older and younger, said the same thing. They don't remember it. Not parts of it, not a different version of it, nothing. I still don't know what I saw that day. Maybe it was something in the storm. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe the others just forgot. But I know what I remember. I remember the wind. I remember the green head moving through the field. I remember something walking through that house like it belonged there. And I remember hiding, watching it come closer, while everyone else somehow forgot it was ever there at all. My parents got divorced when I was 9. After that, my mom moved us into a new house. It wasn't old enough to be considered haunted, not the kind of place you'd expect stories about. But from the beginning, something about it felt wrong. Not everywhere, just certain parts. It wasn't something you could point at or explain. It was more like a feeling that would settle into a specific spot in the house, and when it was there, you knew. You didn't want to stand there. You didn't want to look too long. You definitely didn't want to be alone near it. At the time, my brother and I didn't have words for it. We were just kids. We'd avoid certain areas without really knowing why, brushing it off as being creeped out for no reason. My mom never said anything either. Not then. About 3 years later, something changed. One night, my brother went off to bed like normal. I was about to do the same when my mom stopped me. She hesitated, and then she said something that didn't make sense at the time. She told me, very calmly, but very seriously, that there was something in the house, an energy, and that right now it was in my room. She said it didn't usually show up when we were around, that it would appear in one place and stay there for a while, and that tonight, for whatever reason, it was in my room. She told me I should wait, just give it some time before going in. Even as a kid, I remember thinking it sounded ridiculous, so I ignored her. I laughed it off, brushed past her, and went straight to my room like nothing she said mattered. At first, everything seemed normal. I got into bed, got comfortable. The room was quiet. And then, something shifted. Not in the room itself, in the feeling of it. It's hard to explain unless you felt it before. It wasn't a sound, it wasn't movement, it wasn't something I could see, but I knew instantly that I wasn't alone. In the corner of the room, there was a rocking chair, and from that corner, something was there, watching me. Not with eyes, not with a face, but I could feel it. A focused, deliberate attention locked directly onto me. Heavy, unblinking, and underneath it, something worse. Hate. Not anger, not curiosity, just a cold, quiet hatred. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. It just stared. And the longer I laid there, the stronger it felt, like it was pressing into me, waiting for me to react. That's when I broke. I yelled for my mom. She came in immediately, no hesitation, no confusion. She rushed into the room, and before I could even say anything, she looked straight at the rocking chair, the exact same spot. She didn't ask me what was wrong. She didn't need to. She already knew. I didn't sleep in that room that night. I slept in her bed, and we didn't talk about it much, not right away. But later, when we did, we described the same thing. Not a figure, not a person, just something in that corner, watching. For a while after that, I avoided the room as much as I could. Even during the day, it didn't feel right, like something had been there long enough to leave a trace behind. And then, eventually, it was gone. Just like that. No moment where it left, no final experience. The feeling just stopped showing up. The house went back to normal, or at least as normal as it ever was. Around that same time, something else happened. My mom and I were in another part of the house when we both saw a picture hanging on the wall shift. Not fall, shift. It slid sideways, about an inch, maybe 2, like something had pushed it, slowly, deliberately, and then it dropped straight to the floor. We both saw it. Neither of us said anything right away, because somehow it didn't feel connected. Not directly. It was just another reminder that the house had never quite felt right. I don't know what was in that room. I don't know what we felt. Maybe it was stress, maybe it was imagination, maybe it was something about the house itself. But I do know this. There was a point in my life where both my mom and I walked into the same room, looked at the same empty corner, and felt something looking back at us. And whatever it was, it didn't want us there. About 20 years ago, I rented a small condo while saving up to buy a house. The city wasn't very big, but it was affordable, and most of the year it was unbearably hot. I tried not to use the air conditioning unless I had to, so I kept my windows open at night whenever I could. The building had 3 units and sat at the back of a larger complex. On one side lived an older woman who spent most summers away visiting family. On the other side was a couple with 2 large dogs. They kept to themselves, and before I really got to know them, they moved out. After helping them load their truck, the place went quiet for a few weeks. Then, the new neighbor moved in. I never knew her real name. I called her Redshift. She was short, with bright red hair and a lazy eye that didn't quite stay in place. She was loud all the time. Every movement, every word, everything felt aggressive. I never heard her laugh unless it sounded like she was making fun of someone. She argued on the phone constantly, usually about money or work. Her daughter lived with her and was just as loud. One night, they were screaming at each other so badly that someone called the police. I remember the daughter driving in circles around the building while they threw things and yelled. After that, things got quiet for a little while. But it didn't last. She started doing strange projects around the property. She painted over light fixtures in the shared areas. She tried to build some kind of concrete water feature on her patio and ended up flooding part of the parking lot. Then she tied ropes to different fence posts and hung up a large, ugly fabric thing that flapped loudly in the wind. That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't even open my windows anymore without hearing it. Other neighbors started complaining too. I left notes, I took pictures and sent them to the HOA. Nothing really changed. One day, after listening to her yell on the phone for what felt like hours, I lost my patience. I waited until I heard her back door slam shut. Then I grabbed a knife and went outside. I started cutting the ropes that held up that giant flapping thing. It collapsed louder than I expected. And then I heard her. "No!" The sound came from just over the fence. I froze. I hadn't heard her come back out. I could hear her crying, breathing hard right on the other side. I could see her red hair through the gaps in the fence. I didn't say anything. I just ran back inside and dropped the knife on my patio. That night, I barely slept. I kept waking up feeling guilty and also a little afraid of what she might do. The next morning, I walked around the building half expecting to run into her. I thought maybe she would yell at me and get it over with. Instead, everything was different. The trash she had left outside was gone. The ropes were taken down. The fabric thing was gone too. When I looked into her yard, I saw she had started breaking apart the concrete mess she had made. I also noticed my knife was missing. For a few days, it stayed quiet. I only heard the occasional sound of metal hitting concrete. Then a notice from the HOA showed up on everyone's door, reminding people not to damage shared property or hang things from fences. That night, I woke up to a loud knock at my front door. Just one hard hit. Right after, I heard a car speed away. I went to the door and turned on the porch light. The peephole was too blurry to see anything clearly, so after a moment, I opened it. At first, I didn't notice anything. Then, I saw it. My knife was stuck in the door, pinning the HOA notice in place. There was blood on the paper, and something else. Along the wall beside my door, written in a messy line, were the words, "Happy now?" The letters were smeared in blood and something worse. I called the police that night and stayed with a friend for a while. By the time I came back, she was gone. I never saw her leave. No one ever explained anything. And I never left my windows open at night again. I was stationed in England for about 3 years, working night shifts inside a secure facility on base. During the day, the place was full. Military, contractors, civilians. Always noise, always movement. But at night, it was the complete opposite. Most nights, there were only 2 to 4 of us inside the entire building, and it wasn't a small building. Security was tight. The base itself was fenced. Our facility had its own perimeter. Inside, there were multiple checkpoints, locked sections, and controlled access doors. On top of that, we had an entry control point outside, with guards and roving patrols. You didn't just walk into that place. If you didn't belong there, you weren't getting in. That night, there were 3 of us on shift. We were sitting in the operations area, watching the camera feeds. The system cycled through different parts of the facility, 10 seconds per camera, over and over. Everything was quiet. Then the phone rang. It was the entry control point. They told us they had motion alarms going off in one of the equipment rooms. That meant someone had to go check it. My supervisor looked at me, so I went. The walk there felt longer than usual. The building was silent. No voices, no footsteps, just the low hum of equipment and the sound of my own boots on the floor. I reached the room, opened the door, and stepped inside. Nothing. No movement, no sound, just rows of equipment, exactly how it should be. I picked up the phone in the room and called back to my supervisor. "Nothing here," I told him. Then I called the entry control point. "Hey," I said, trying to keep it casual, "can you see me on the camera?" There was a short pause. Then the voice on the other end said, "We have 2 of you in the room." For a second, I thought I misheard them. "What?" I asked. "We have 2 of you in the room." I looked up at the camera, tried not to move too fast, tried not to let it show. "Where's the other one?" I asked. "About your 5 o'clock. Behind me." I didn't turn around right away. "Describe him," I said. There was another pause. "About 6 feet, wearing BDUs, looks like a lifter." That didn't make sense. We hadn't worn BDUs in years. Slowly, I turned and pointed behind me. "Right there?" I asked. "Yeah," they said. There was nothing there. At that point, I asked if they had called the operations floor yet. They said no. So I hung up and called my supervisor. "Pull up the feed for the equipment room," I told him. There was a few seconds of silence. Then he said, "Who the hell is that?" I didn't ask anything else. I hung up the phone, got out of that room as fast as I could, and shut the door behind me. It was a heavy blast door, and I made sure it sealed. When I got back to the operations floor, I expected someone to be laughing. Nobody was. Instead, security forces were already there. My supervisor had called them in. We went back to the room together. 3 of them, weapons ready, me right behind them with nothing but a multi-tool on my belt. I opened the door again. They cleared the room. Nothing. No one. Then the phone rang. I picked it up. More motion alarms. Not just one room this time, all over the facility. Rooms that had already been locked down for the night, places no one should have been able to access. Security forces started moving through the building, room by room, hallway by hallway, clearing everything. It took over an hour. Nothing was found. We called it up to command. Everyone got notified, but there was nothing to show them. The cameras didn't record. There was no footage to review. But the motion sensors did log activity. Over 30 separate alarms, each one on its own circuit, hardwired, no network, no way for them all to just glitch at once. And some of those sensors were low sensitivity. They don't go off unless something big moves, something like a person. We still had hours left on shift, and we had to stay in that building, knowing that something had set off alarms in places no one could reach, knowing that 2 different people had seen someone standing behind me when no one was there. We didn't leave until long after the morning crew came in. There were reports, debriefs, questions, no answers. And the part that still bothers me the most is those cameras were high quality. You could see faces clearly from across a room. They could see mine, no problem. But the other one, they said they couldn't make out its face at all. Not because it was too far away, not because of the lighting, just nothing there to see. All I know is this: I was alone in that room, but they didn't see it that way. They said there were two of me, and to this day, no one knows who the other one was. My sisters and I used to babysit for a family who lived in a house that never felt right. It sat about a mile down a private dirt road past a stretch of swamp and thick woods that blocked out most of the light. By the time you reached the top of the hill where the house stood, it already felt like you had gone too far. The house itself was an old 3-story mansion from the 1800s. It had an abandoned tennis court, an overgrown orchard, and strange old features inside, like a hand-pulled elevator and a dumbwaiter that creaked even when no one touched it. There was no cell service out there. The landline barely worked half the time. And sometimes, as you drove up, you'd pass the family's landscaper in the back lot, alone, silent, hanging and cutting deer from a wooden frame outside his shack. It wasn't just the house. Everything about the place felt off. My oldest sister was the first to babysit there. Back then, the kid was just a baby. She told us later that she used to hear footsteps over the baby monitor at night, soft, steady pacing in rooms where no one should have been. She convinced herself it was nothing, until it wasn't. One afternoon, she was in the basement kitchen making lunch while the kid played nearby. The parents weren't supposed to be home for hours. Then she heard voices, upstairs. Not just one voice, multiple, talking, laughing. It sounded like a group of people had just walked into the house. She froze. After a moment, she tried to stay calm and asked the kid, who was about 3 or 4 at the time, if his parents had hired someone to come by. He looked at her and said, very plainly, "Now, we hear voices sometimes. Mommy and Daddy say not to talk about that." Another time, she was cooking when she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. A woman walking through the room. She didn't see her face, just the back of her moving into the next room. Then the TV turned on by itself. My sister didn't scream. She didn't run. She just asked the kid as calmly as she could to go turn it off. He started crying. He didn't want to go in there alone, so she went with him, but she made him walk in first. The worst time for her was when the family was out of town. She brought a friend with her because she didn't want to be in the house alone. They were going room to room, feeding the cat, watering plants, trying to get in and out as fast as possible. Then, without warning, the master bedroom door slammed shut, hard. The handle started shaking like someone on the other side was trying to open it. They both just stood there for a second. Then they ran. By the time my middle sister started babysitting, the kid was older, and he talked. He would point to things around the house and say they belonged to the dead people. Not in a joking way, just casually. That's their chair. That's their room. That's their car. Like he was sharing the house with them. One day she found him staring at an old painting, completely still. Then he dropped to the floor and started rolling, repeating a man's name over and over again. He didn't respond to her for a while. She had to shout his name several times before he snapped out of it. When he looked up at her, he seemed confused, like he didn't know why she was yelling. By the time I started babysitting, he was around 8. I remember sitting in the doorway while he played on the floor. Everything felt normal, quiet. Then he looked up, past me, over my shoulder. His expression changed, just for a second. Confusion, recognition. Then he forced a laugh. "That was weird," he said. I asked him what he meant. He hesitated, looked down, and mumbled, "Nothing. I just saw someone, but I didn't want to scare you." My stomach dropped. He had night terrors, not just once or twice, all the time. He would wake up screaming about a man in the room. Sometimes he would run full speed out of the room and down the stairs, still half asleep. It only seemed to happen when he slept in one particular room. And it wasn't just him. Whenever he had friends stay over, the same thing would happen. Different kids, different nights, same room. They would wake up screaming about a man standing in the room with them. Another babysitter refused to stay inside once the kid went to bed. She would sit on the porch, even in the cold, and wait there until the parents came home. She said the feeling inside the house was worse than being alone outside at night. The strangest part was the parents. They knew. They had to. But they didn't seem afraid. When my sister told them about their son going into a trance, they didn't panic. They didn't even seem that concerned. They just laughed and said they'd mention it to his therapist, like it was normal, like it was expected. They loved that house. They leaned into it. The decorations, the atmosphere, the history. People said the place had a past, that strange things had happened there long before they moved in, that people had done things in that house, things you don't really talk about. I don't know what was in that house. None of us do. But I know this. Too many people saw things. Too many people heard things. Too many kids woke up screaming about the same man in the same room. And the one thing I've never been able to forget was the way he looked over my shoulder, saw something standing there, and laughed, just so I wouldn't turn around. This happened when I was about 8 years old. I'm 41 now, and I still remember it clearly. We had just moved into a new house in Fairfield, California. From the very first day, something about that place felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it strongly. Even as a child, I was sensitive to things most people couldn't see or feel, though I try to ignore that now. A lot of strange things happened in that house, to me, my family, and even visitors. But one night stands out more than anything else. Relatives from Maui had come to stay with us. My aunt and uncle took my room, so I stayed in my older brother's room for a while. One night, my older sister was away at a friend's house, so my brother told me to sleep in her room. I didn't like that idea. Before that night, I had overheard my sister telling her friends about strange things that happened in her room. I always thought she was joking. Most of the weird things in the house happened downstairs, in the kitchen, dining room, or near the staircase. It was rare for anything to happen in the bedrooms. But according to her, her room was different. That night, I got ready for bed, turned off the lights, and pulled the covers over my head. At first, everything was quiet. Then I heard it, a faint sound. It sounded like paper being crumpled. Soft at first, almost easy to ignore, but it kept going, and slowly it started getting louder. I threw the blanket off and sat up. The sound stopped immediately. The room went completely silent. I sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was my brother. Maybe it was my relatives in another room. Trying to stay calm, I lay back down and pulled the covers over myself again. The sound came back. This time it was louder, and it wasn't alone. Now they were footsteps. It sounded like someone was walking across the room, slowly, while crumpling paper in their hands, back and forth, from one side of the room to the other. I couldn't see anything. The room was completely dark. All I could do was lie there and listen. A minute passed, maybe 2. With every second, the sound grew louder. The footsteps became heavier. The crumpling became more aggressive. It felt like whoever or whatever was in that room was getting angrier. I thought about running to my parents' room, but I didn't. My parents had experienced things in that house too, but they always brushed it off. They didn't like us talking about it, and I didn't want to upset them. So I stayed, frozen under the covers, listening. Then it changed. The footsteps didn't stop, but now there was another sound. Groaning. Low at first, slow, frustrated, like something trying to hold back anger. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it would stop, but it didn't. The groaning got louder, deeper, more intense, and then it let out a loud, violent groan, so loud it felt like the entire room shook. That was it. I didn't think, I didn't hesitate. I ran, out of the room, down the hall, straight into my parents' room. The next day, when my sister got home, I asked her about it. I told her everything. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded and said, "Yeah, that happens all the time." She told me she used to be scared of it too, but after a while, she got used to it. She said it never did anything physical. It just walked around, made noise, groaned. I never slept in that room again, and I never forgot that night, because whatever was in that room wasn't just making noise. It felt like it knew I was there, and it wanted me to know it was there too.
This isn't a ghost story. Nothing paranormal happened, but it's one of the scariest nights I've ever experienced. Back in my second year of university, we decided to organize a welcome party for our juniors. One of my close friends was in charge of hosting and planning everything. We chose a club about 15 kilometers away from campus. It wasn't our first choice. The area had a reputation. It was known as a late-night hangout spot for all kinds of people. Not exactly the safest place, especially for girls. But since it was relatively close to the university and convenient for hostel students, we went ahead with it. Everything was set. The venue was booked, invitations were sent, and the plan was ready. I wasn't planning to go. I struggle with social anxiety, and big gatherings aren't really my thing. But the night before the party, my friend called me and asked me to come. Another close friend of ours had canceled, and she didn't want to manage everything alone. So I agreed. I made last-minute arrangements, convinced my parents, and the next day she picked me up. We stopped by the university to pick up a few more girls before heading to the venue. Before we even got there, we made a rule. Once we were done with hosting duties, we would leave immediately. No staying back, no after-party. At first, everything was fine. The music was loud, people were dancing, and the atmosphere felt normal. But it didn't stay that way for long. At some point, a guy from our class decided to invite a group of his friends. That's when things started to feel off. They weren't like the rest of us. They kept staring, not casually, but constantly. It was uncomfortable enough that my friend quietly told me to stay close to her. By around 8 p.m., things had changed completely. People had started drinking heavily. The energy in the room shifted. Conversations got louder, movements got more aggressive, and small disagreements started turning into arguments. I remember one moment clearly. Our co-host got into a heated argument with the guy who had invited those outsiders. It looked like it could turn into a fight at any second. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't a controlled environment anymore. The guys, both our classmates and the outsiders, were clearly drunk now. Some of them started insisting on escorting girls out. It didn't feel like concern. It felt forced. At one point, it was just me, my friend, and a few other girls standing there, surrounded by a crowd of drunk men. That's when I knew we needed to leave. I kept telling my friend over and over that we should go, but people kept stopping her, pulling her into conversations, asking her to stay longer. And the outsiders weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They started catcalling. Thankfully, a few of our guy friends hadn't been drinking. They noticed what was happening and stepped in. They stayed with us and helped us get out of the crowd safely. Their original plan was to stay back in case things got worse inside. At that point, we thought the hardest part was over. We were wrong. The real fear began when we got into the car. Not long after we left, we noticed another car behind us. At first, we weren't sure. Maybe it was just coincidence. But then we tried something. We changed direction. They followed. We slowed down. They stayed. We even turned back toward the venue for a moment. They were still there. That's when we knew they were following us. Panic started to set in. Without wasting time, we called the same guy friends who'd helped us earlier. The moment they understood what was happening, they changed their plans. Instead of staying back, they came and joined us. Now we weren't alone. We drove carefully, sticking together, making sure no one was left behind. One girl who lived far away, so I brought her home with me instead. Eventually, we reached the university area, and just like that, the car that had been following us disappeared. I remember finally getting home and seeing my dad waiting for me. That was the moment I felt safe again. The next day, we found out what had happened after we left. Shortly after we exited the club, the place was raided by the police. To this day, I still think about that night. Nothing happened, but it easily could have. And sometimes that's what makes it more frightening than anything else.
It all started with my uncle's house. Even before we moved in, my little cousin whispered that it was haunted. Nobody really took him seriously at the time, but as the years went by, there were too many strange occurrences for anyone to ignore. Things that didn't make sense, things that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. One night, my mom and I ended up sleeping in my aunt and uncle's bedroom. They were out of town, and since we had been living there for a while, it didn't feel unusual. The room was quiet, the only sounds coming from the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant traffic outside. My mom was lying on my aunt's side of the bed when she felt it, an undeniable presence at the foot of the bed. It wasn't just a feeling of being watched, it was heavier than that. It pressed on her chest, filling the room with something she couldn't see but could feel. She opened her eyes slightly, and then she saw him, a man, standing there casually, one leg propped on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on his chin, and he was laughing. It wasn't a friendly laugh, it was quiet, knowing, almost mocking. Her mind raced, but her body froze. She noticed every detail: bald, purple shirt, blue jeans. The way he stood, relaxed yet deliberate, like he belonged there. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone, leaving the room silent again, except for her pounding heart. The next day, my aunt and uncle returned. They were talking casually about their trip when my aunt said something that made my mom shiver. She mentioned how much she hated it when my cousin rested his hand on his chin because it reminded her of her ex-husband. That alone sent chills through my mom. But then my uncle pulled out a photo, and before even seeing it, my mom felt it. She knew without a doubt that it was the same man she had seen the night before. Bald, purple shirt, blue jeans. Every detail exactly as she remembered. My uncle got goosebumps, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. The eeriness didn't end there. Years earlier, my aunt's ex had told her with a strange certainty that he would haunt her, specifically her side of the bed, that exact side, the side my mom had been sleeping on. Even stranger, this man, though alive, was known to dabble in the occult. He had practiced astral projection intentionally, claiming he could leave his body and appear elsewhere. But whether it was a trick of the mind, a coincidence, or something else entirely, the presence had chosen that night, that side of the bed, for my mom to see him. Even now, thinking back, it sends a shiver through me. The room, the silence, the way he had stood there laughing, it felt deliberate, like he had been waiting for that moment. The memory lingers, because some things, some encounters, don't leave you when the morning comes. They stay. You can feel them in the quiet corners of a room, in the way the air seems heavier on certain nights, in the echo of footsteps you never heard anyone make. Some things are impossible to explain. Some things don't need to be, and some things will follow you long after you think you've left them behind.